here because a white supremacist dictator known as President Donald Trump thought he could silence us. They thought they could stop a movement. You can rig a map, but you can't rig a movement.
They're afraid of us coming together. They're afraid of us protecting one another.
We have seen this before, where some people in black robes try to deny or take away our rights.
So you've got a few members of the political class who are black who are trying to say that racism is rearing its ugly head. It's back on the prowl. And of course, that the leader of all of this is Donald Trump. Gosh. I guess it doesn't end. It really feels, though, I'm just going to say, before we get to Deroy, it feels like when they go to this talking point, they've run out of everything else. Let's talk to our friend Deroy Murdock, nationally syndicated columnist, Project 21 ambassador, and Fox News contributor and author of Black Candidates Do Not Need Black Voters to Win in The Spectator, which you can read right now. Deroy, happy Wednesday. Welcome back.
Annie, happy Wednesday to you, too.
So you hear this stuff and you know, you're listening to some of these, Cory Booker included, talking about how, you know, black people, they're trying to come at you again. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's just so tiresome. You know, we've heard this for decades. These people just have nothing else to talk about. And the rhetoric is just so extreme and so insane. You had, I think, on Saturday, you had Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts. She's one of the members of the squad. And she said, if I can remember exactly the words, that the Trump administration would rather have black people picking cotton than picking the next president of the United States. I mean, really? Black people out picking cotton. And what I love about this, and they always get this wrong because they're so historically ignorant, the people who had blacks picking cotton for free, not being paid as slaves, those are not Republicans. Those are Democrats. Democrats were the ones who ran slavery. These are the people who pushed Jim Crow. They're the people who ended Reconstruction. And the Republicans were the ones, Abraham Lincoln and Ulysses Grant and the rest, were the ones who liberated slaves, emancipated slaves, tried very hard to have Reconstruction. In fact, under Reconstruction, you had black members of the U.S. House of Representatives. You had black senators who, after the Civil War, representing Mississippi and other states in the Congress. And then when, for various reasons, that fell to pieces, the Democrats were the ones who said, you know, get back in line, boy. You're not going to be congressman. You're not going to be senator. You're going to be living as a sharecropper or something like this. That was done by Democrats. So the Democrats, you'd think, would have the sense to say, all right, we're not going to point to this because it just makes the Democrat Party look bad. But these people are so historically ignorant, they do that anyway. But again, the idea that the GOP is trying to get black folks to go back and be slaves is ridiculous, absurd, twisted, and it just gets people hopped up, bothered. And you've seen the political violence that's erupted around this country. Maybe it eventually gets people to pick up guns and ammo and open fire at Republicans. It's reckless. It's twisted, and it's potentially dangerous and potentially homicidal.
Deroy Murdock speaking with us right now. I mean, they've played this card quite some time, and there is truth to the way that black Americans have been disenfranchised in our history, of course. And I think that it's very important for people when they're having this discussion, it's important for me at least, to acknowledge that this isn't all a facade. It's not all for show or for to gin up the crowd and to get everybody worked up for power right now. But it's worse to me when you consider the history that exists in this country, what we've shed blood over to stop, how far we've come to the point where we have had a black president of the United States. And that was, not that long ago, that there is a reality to the disenfranchisement of black people in America, and they're using it right now. They're grabbing onto something that existed before and using it right now to scare people so that they can have political power.
I think that's very true, and when you listen to people like on the recordings you just played earlier, you'd think we're living in Birmingham, Alabama, back in 1955 or 56 or something like this. These people do not like people to focus on the fact that, as you say, we had a black president of the United States elected in 2008 comfortably, reelected in 2012 comfortably, beating white men. Oh, it's white supremacy. Well, how is it the white supremacists let John McCain lose the election and let Mitt Romney, another white man, lose the election to a black guy who was in the White House for 8 years? You had the first black attorney general, Eric Holder, under Obama. You had the second black attorney general, Loretta Lynch, under Obama. Previous to that, you had the first black Secretary of State, Colin Powell, and the second black Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, both back to back black secretaries of state under G.W. Bush, a Republican. They don't like to talk about that sort of thing. They don't like to focus on the fact that until January 20th of last year, we had Lloyd Austin, a black man, running the Pentagon, an entire Department of Defense, which is now the Department of War. That was going on. They don't like to focus on that at all. And also there's this notion that they're saying, well, now since this Calais decision by the Supreme Court, there'll be no more black politicians. All the black politicians will lose their positions, and we'll have just white people running Congress and the House and the Senate. I've got in this piece in the American Spectator, black politicians don't need black voters to win. A number of examples of people who are in Congress in major positions who are in constituencies with very few black folks. For example, Obama himself, when he was elected president, America's only at that time 12.6% black, yet somehow he's able to get another, 38, 39% of non-blacks to support him, and he ended up being president of the United States. We've got another guy's been in the news lately, Attorney General Keith Ellison of Minnesota. He's Attorney General of the whole state of Minnesota, which is only 7% black. We had Deval Patrick. He was governor of the state of Massachusetts, only 6.8% black, 81% white. He somehow was elected by those people to represent them as governor. And then you've got Burgess Owens, a congressman from Utah. His district is 1.5% black and 74% white, and somehow or another, the racist white people elected him to be their congressman. Isn't that amazing? Conversely, you've got a district in Tennessee, which is now being carved up as part of this redistricting thing. It's Tennessee's 9th district. It's 61% black, and since 26, so it's 10 terms, 20 years, they've elected as their congressman a guy named Steve Cohen. Guess what? He's white. So this 61% black district, for whatever reason, they've decided, hey, we want to have a white congressman. They're allowed to do that, and that's how they've had their representation in Washington D.C. So the whole idea that white people never vote for black people, and black people only get elected if they're in all majority black districts. It's the political equivalent of when I remember I was a kid and I my dad taught me how to ride a bicycle, and my bicycle had training wheels. At some point, my dad said, "All right, you're ready. We're going to take the training wheels off." I said, "Oh no, I'm going to fall down and hurt myself." He said, "Don't worry, you'll be fine. Trust me." And guess what? He took off the training wheels, and I learned to ride a bike without the training wheels. I did just fine. In fact, I rode a bike around Central Park on Sunday as a result of that learning. And so I think what these black politicians have to do is say, look, you can take off the training wheels, run as normal people, run as normal Democrats or Republicans. We'll have a lot of black faces in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate and other positions around the country. So it'd be good for these people to grow up and try to operate as regular politicians rather than A, rely on the training wheels, and B, when they seem that those will be threatened, raise the prospect of slavery coming back and all this Jim Crow talk and all this other divisive rhetoric, which just causes more racial tension, as I say, potential bloodshed in this country right now.
We're speaking with Deroy Murdock, nationally syndicated columnist. His piece right now in the Spectator, you go to spectator.org to read it, and it's Black candidates do not need black voters to win. When racism is the first thing that a lot of these individuals talk about, they're alleging that the Supreme Court is racist. That if you are on the Supreme Court and you ruled in favor of the Calais decision, that you are a racist, and that anybody who supports their understanding of the Constitution as it is applied to districting, I mean, at its core, what their ruling said is you can't use a person's skin color to define who will represent them, and you can't use it to disenfranchise other people who might have a different skin color. These are all things, details that you don't ever hear being discussed into the megaphones in front of the crowds on the steps of the Capitol building. It's meant to scare. It's meant to rile people up. And you and I have talked about, I have not forgotten about your phrase, nervous white people. I think it's the funniest thing that I've ever heard. There are people who are my way of thinking, and you and I agree on pretty much most all things politically, but there are people who are like me that are white, that are nervous to talk about these issues because they've been scared away in the last 10 to 15 years. They've been told to sit down and be quiet, and they've said, fine, I'll just do that. They vote the way they vote, but they stay quiet. Should there be noise pushing back on what we're hearing from the Cory Bookers of the world and all these other individuals that you list in this article?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think anyone in this country, black, white, or otherwise, has the right to talk about this sort of stuff. And whether you agree with both of us or disagree, stand up and state your piece, and try to be factual and try to be rational about it. I think those are appropriate requests. But, yeah, you have the right to get up and say whatever you want. And one of the things people ought to say is, it's very hard for people to say the Supreme Court is being racist when their decision said you may not use race when you are redistricting congressional districts. Race should not be a factor. How can you be racist for saying don't use race? Now, the court did say, and this is something that it doesn't really come out in the liberal left-wing media, they said that you may look at race if there is intentional discrimination. You have to prove that there is, according to the language of the decision, at least the inference of intentional discrimination. And if there is the inference of inference of intentional discrimination, then yes, you can use Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and go about racial redistricting. If somebody who drew these congressional lines said, hey, we hate black people, we hate Hispanics, whatever, let's carve lines out to exclude these people, or we hate white people for that matter. And if that's the case, then when you're redistricting, you can perhaps use Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. All you hear is, oh, they gutted the Voting Rights Act, or they gutted Section 2, or they destroyed the Voting Rights Act. All the court said is, look, you need to show there's intentional discrimination, not, this district is only 10% black, and America's 12.6% black, so therefore it's racism. Now, maybe when they were trying to put Republicans and Democrats together, they happened to do it in a way that reduces the number of black people in a district. It doesn't mean they deliberately all sat down in a room and said, hey, here's a way we can really screw the blacks. Let's do this district that way. You need to show that there's some intentional racial discrimination before you can use Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. That's what this decision said. It didn't say, hey, let's make sure black people will never be elected to the U.S. House ever again, which is the way it's being presented by Cory Booker, Ayanna Pressley, and James Clyburn, and all these other people who, the racial arsonists who seem to do nothing other than find different ways for us to tear this country to pieces.
Deroy Murdock speaking with us. Before we let you go, I have to ask you, yesterday, 6 primaries across the country. Thomas Massie does not win his primary. Did that come as a surprise to you? Is it such a unique situation that it doesn't really say a whole lot about everything else? Or do you think that there is something to read out of the Thomas Massie primary loss last night?
Well, I think the lesson from the Massie loss is that if you're a Republican, it's really a good idea to be a team player. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to vote 100% with the party all the time. There'll be various reasons where people have philosophical differences, or maybe this makes a lot of sense nationwide, but hey, in my district, it's kind of a problem. Fine, people will go off the reservation, here and there. But Thomas Massie voted against the One Big Beautiful Bill. He voted with the Democrats on some of these war powers things to reduce the president's ability to keep Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon. He opposed Trump on a whole lot of things, time and time again. I don't think he did so because he's a left-wing Republican as such. He's not really a rhino per se. He's sort of a super overly idealistic libertarian, and he's one of these people who I think will oppose something that is 95% limited government pro market, because it's not 99%.
Yeah.
That if it comes 95% the way you want, that's not good enough. It has to be 100% pure. Well, if you can get something that's not 100% purely free market, but it's 95% versus where we are now, which is something that's 40 or 50%. That's a pretty huge improvement. And I would say at that point you take the win, and maybe you can come back later and say, all right, now we want to move the ball from the 95-yard line to the 99-yard line. If that's what you want to do, great. But he's the kind of person to say, nope, it's not perfect, so I'm going to vote against something that's very good because it's not perfect. And then, look, if we have 250 Republicans and a massive majority, then fine, go ahead and have your eccentricity. That's cool. But, these votes very often come down to 1 or 2 votes. There's a microscopic majority. I mean, the GOP caucus is almost, it's literally within about two seats of going away and having Hakeem Jeffries get the gavel even before the midterm elections. So when you've got something that tight, you really need to be a team player on important votes, and he wasn't. And I think Trump got very tired of that, and now he's going to be former congressman within about 6 months.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. President Trump's coattails, they still have a little bit of power in them.
They sure do.
Deroy Murdock, it's a pleasure to speak with you again. Thanks for joining us today.
Annie, great to talk to you again. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Deroy Murdock is a nationally syndicated columnist, Project 21 ambassador, and Fox News contributor.